forget this thing most of the time. Try to remember. This is a crazy time of the year between Thanksgiving and Christmas because nobody's schedule seems to be right. Is that the way it is? School's going to be out soon. All right. What's that?
Nobody likes to return my phone calls.
Thinking that might be a usual thing with your job. Hate to say, but anyway. We finished last week in verse 12. There's a way that seems right to man, but its end is the way of death. And so we talked a little bit about that we don't know what is right or wrong unless God tells us. Being the ultimate authority, He knows what's right or wrong, moral, immoral. And so the only way for us to have an absolute truth is for God to tell it to us, right? And for us to know it from Him. Anyway, as you come to verse 13, even in laughter the heart may sorrow, and the end of mirth may be grief. This verse, I'll tell you, is probably the one that I've struggled the most with in this chapter. So if we tied it to verse 13 or verse 12 here, talking about the idea of knowing there's a way that seems right to man, but its end is the way of death. Even in laughter, the heart may sorrow, and the end of mirth may be grief. When you look at this in connection, if we're talking about spiritual things, some commentators, like I say, a lot of these verses we can understand by looking at the context and things, point to the idea of the vanity of earthly joy. And so others talk about the possibility of it implying the idea of sometimes we appear to be happy about things, but there's sorrow inside. And then some point to the idea of even in laughter, the heart may sorrow. And so the idea of looking at things from a different perspective. And so when we think about that, sometimes we say, well, with the end of an era, for example, it's also another beginning, right, of something else. And so with that perspective also, I'll take comments if you have any comments or insight on this.
The first half of it, I think it's kind of like you're, like after, you know how you sit around and talk about a person, so you might laugh about the good times, but you're still full of grief.
Yeah. And that's what some of the information I was reading pointed to that idea, even to that. And so the others pointed to the idea of the vanity there is in earthly joy. There's some things that we take joy in on this earth that we're not going to have in the spiritual realm and don't have anything to do with spiritual things. You think about some of the hobbies that we enjoy. How many of our hobbies are tied to this earth? Think about that, and so the vanity in that. So those are possibilities. So we come to verse 14. It says, the backslider in heart will be filled with his own ways, but a good man will be satisfied from above. And so go to Matthew 6 and verse 2. Matthew 6:2. As you get there, go ahead and read that verse for us, if you feel like it. Therefore, when you do a charitable deed, do not sound a trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may have glory from men. Assuredly, I say to you, they have their reward. And so what's the reward for those who do their good deeds in the open for the world to see?
Praise of men.
Yeah, praise of men, right? And so they're taking pride in what people are seeing them do. So we go back and we look at this verse. In verse 14, it says, the backslider in heart will be filled with his own ways. But a good man will be satisfied from what? From above. Yeah, God will bless us in His time in the right ways. And so don't be doing things. The backslider, when you look at that, what's a backslider?
Somebody's returned to what he was doing before.
Okay, that's exactly right. You know, you go 2 steps forward, you slide 2 steps back. You're back in the same place, okay? And so what would this indicate? Backsliding is what? Indication of sin, okay?
Going back to his old ways.
Going back to, yeah. And so a sinful person in heart will be filled with what? His own ways. You'll be satisfied with that. But a good man will be satisfied with what? And so as we put this in sections, which I failed to do, give you the last couple verses, we look at this, section 27, a fulfilled life, as we look at the second part. To live a fulfilled life, does everyone have to know how fulfilled your life is? Who knows? You do, right? You do. And so that's what I put for this verse, section 27. We go on to verse 15. It says, "A simple believes every word, but the prudent considers well his steps." This word prudent we've seen oftentimes, and I go back and I look at the meaning of the words and forget what the meanings were. So I'm going to give you the definition again. An alternate translation or a word to translate this is the word cunning. Also could be translated as crafty or careful. And so here's the thing about this word is most commonly this word is translated as in the negative. Like you're talking like being foxy or crafty, right? Trying to deceive. But in this instance, that's not the context. Therefore, the word's translated as prudent. And you think about the difference between a prudent individual and a crafty individual. Both have what we would say is some level of street smarts, maybe, right? We think about that. But here we're talking about true wisdom. And so here, when we look at this, the simple believes every word. Right? And we as Christians, we're supposed to be simple people, but we're also supposed to be what? Wise. I want to look at a couple verses in the New Testament in connection with it. Go to Ephesians 5, verse 15. Ephesians 5, verse 15. And so, like I said, I just want to bring that to our attention. In this context, it's not talking about being sly or crafty. It's talking about being wise. Prudent is his word. Ephesians 5:15, "See then that you walk circumspectly, not as fools, but as wise, redeeming the time because the days are evil." So what's it mean to walk circumspectly? Upright and carefully. The idea is with your eyes wide open, focused on the task of what? Of walking. You know, have you guys ever been on a trail where you had to walk carefully? I remember going to the mountains. We've been blessed to go several times. One time we took the kids. We started up this trail and kept getting steeper and steeper and narrower until it felt like your feet were going in front of one another, and it was down one side and up the other. And how do you think we walked? Someone say carefully. Well, we'd say circumspectly, right, using this definition. So that's the idea of being wise, but the prudent considers well his steps. What do our steps do? Take us where we're going. They're leading us in a direction. So how many of us are carefully considering the direction that we're headed? Okay. And so another verse I want to share is Matthew 10:16. Matthew 10:16. We think about this principle. Somebody can go ahead and read it if you're there. Matthew 10:16.
"Behold, I am sending you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. So be wise as serpents and innocent as doves."
Okay. And so here's Jesus is sending out his apostles. What was he telling them to do? Be careful, right? Be careful. Pay attention. So we go back and we look at this. We see here that the simple believes every word, right? Easily deceived is the fool. But the prudent considers well what? His steps. You need to think about where our lives are headed. What's at the end of this life? Some people say, well, 6-foot hole, a funeral, all these things. But what's at the end of this life? Eternity, right? Eternity. Now, in eternity, we've got two places, two destinations. And so as we think about this, the wise considers well his steps. Why? Because our steps in this life are leading us to one of those two places, aren't they? All right, any questions or comments about this?
When I read this, I think of a lot of people today who believe anything they hear on TV or Facebook or whatever.
Or their friends, or
Yeah. And then so you have the simple that says here that believe everything they hear, and then you have the prudent that I'm gonna check the facts out.
Yeah.
Check see if that's right.
yeah.
Are you saying Facebook's not true, Eric?
Only 89%.
I visited with someone real recently, and they were talking about their children are grown now, but they were talking about when their children were younger. Their children visited a church, and they said, "What did you learn in Bible class?" Like, we did a craft. And I was like, "No, what was the Bible story?" We didn't have a Bible story, we had a craft. That was it. There's no Bible story. And so, kind of what Eric says, spiritually speaking, you think about that. Where are people headed? Are we watching carefully? How important are our children's classes here? It's going to pave the way for the rest of their life. We should be training at home as well. But here's the same idea. If we just do crafts and play games in children's classes, what are the children going to expect worship to be like when they get older? Entertainment. And where's our world at today? So that's a good point Eric brought up. Believe everything.
That's what ESV says. Believes everything.
Believes everything. Yeah. Verse 16. Oh, wait, see. We didn't get a section. Where would we put this? The section is, I put 1, wisdom. Regardeth his steps carefully. Let's see, 16. This 16, 17 are connected to 15. I meant to read them together and through 19. So I'll go ahead and read these together. It says, wise man fears and departs from evil, but a fool rages and is self-confident. A quick-tempered man acts foolishly, and a man of wicked intentions is hated. And the simple inherit folly, but the prudent are crowned with knowledge. The evil will bow before the good, and the wicked at the gate of the righteous. Okay. If you were to take these sections, this section of Scripture, 5 verses, put them together, I think the summation of this are going to be who wins? Who wins? The good. The good always wins. And so, of course, a lot of movies that we watch, we say, what always wins? Right? When you play cops and robbers, who always wins? The cops, right?
In our days, it was the cops.
It was the cops. In your day, it's the cops. Anyway, when you think about that principle, where did that principle start? Why do the cops always win? It's good versus evil. That's a principle that we see that started all the way from the beginning. You go back to Genesis 3 and verse 15. What's the prophecy? Genesis 3 and verse 15. God tells Adam and Eve in the garden, he says that Christ is going to stomp out Satan. That's the prophecy. So we don't know how old the earth was, right? Days, weeks, or months, short period of time, in comparison to since then, that Adam and Eve were in the garden. And from that very beginning, what do we know about good versus evil? Who wins? Good's always going to win. We see that principle here. So we see that here, verse 16, a wise man fears and departs from what? Evil. Why? You guys ever been picked for teams, and when you got picked, you realized that you're on the losing team? Andy says, yeah. You enjoy that? Here's the thing. We as Christians, or those that study the Bible, realize who's going to win, don't we? So a wise man fears and departs from evil, but a fool rages and is self-confident. And so he's confident in his own salvation. We go back to verse 12. It says there's a way that seems right to a man, but the end is the way of death. Right? He doesn't know what's right or wrong, doesn't know where he's going, but he's going to do it his way. Come to verse 17.
Or he pretends it's right.
Or pretends it's right.
And he just doesn't want to give up all the evil part of it.
No, he's tied to it. And we'll see that later on in this chapter some.
His thinking, he's right.
His thinking, right. Yeah. So then a quick-tempered man acts foolishly. Verse 17, go to Ephesians 4:26. Ephesians 4:26. Ephesians 4:26 says, be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your wrath. I would say that oftentimes we don't, is it sinful to be angry?
No, but this says quick-tempered.
Quick-tempered, okay.
It doesn't say slow to anger, it says quick-tempered.
Be quick-tempered.
That would be how he acts whenever something doesn't.
Okay, so with that thought in mind, quick-tempered, when you think about what is a temper, we talk about the idea of someone losing their temper, right?
Controlling your anger.
It's controlling, okay. Anybody ever watch Forged in Fire? What do they do to the blade at the end of round one? What do they do to it? They temper it. What's that do? Okay, it hardens it, strengthens it. It helps it hold. It holds its edge, holds its strength. There's a lot of things it does, right? But it makes the blade better, right? What happens to a blade that's not properly tempered? You see them break off. You see them not hold an edge. There's different things that happen. And so the idea of being tempered is what we're talking about, maintaining its integrity. That's the principle. To maintain its integrity. And so here we see a quick-tempered man. The idea it's talking about is someone that loses its temper, integrity, loses its integrity. Does it matter at which speed a Christian loses their integrity? No. So we're talking about self-control. And so acts foolishly. And so then it says a man of wicked intentions is hated. We go and we go to Psalm 4 and verse 4 real quick while we're thinking about this. Psalm 4:4. It says, be angry and do not sin. Meditate within your heart on your bed and be still. And so here we go back and we think, is it wrong for us to be angry? It's an emotion. But the idea here is not to lose control of our temper because of our emotions, right? A quick-tempered man acts how? Foolishly. Is anger the only thing that will cause us to act foolishly?
I don't think anger always makes you act foolishly.
No.
Sometimes I think
But
anger,
uncontrolled.
Is a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
Because, when I get angry teaching kids, they know it and they know the reason.
Causes you to tighten up. Yeah.
But, I can't just let them run over me.
No, no. And we're not saying it's wrong, but we're losing. But again, the idea is losing our integrity. Jesus was angry, but he didn't sin, right? Like you say, it's an emotion that caused him to act, right? But he still had restraint, and he understood what he was doing while he did it. Okay, so where would we put this on our section? Section 4, be the human heart of anger, because that's an emotion that we lose control of sometimes. But then it says, in a man of wicked intentions is hated. And so again, we go back and we think about these 5 verses in connection with one another. Who wins? Righteousness always wins. And every time we see the unwise, the wicked, when they continue in the characteristic of being unwise, what happens? It's constant failure, right? We see they'll come to failure every time. So we come to verse 18. It says this: the simple inherit folly, but the prudent are crowned with knowledge. Again, we talk about the simple, those who don't care, right? Inherit folly. They're not concerned. And we go back and we look at where we began in verse 15. It says the prudent considers well his steps. We see the beginning of the verse, the simple believes every word. They're not concerned, okay? I think about movements. I thought about the hippie movement, right? Were they very concerned about much?
No.
No.
Yeah, where they get their next pot.
Yeah, where they get they're just not concerned. Where did that lifestyle lead to? Destruction or success? Okay, so we come and we look here, but the prudent are crowned with what? Knowledge. What are they looking for? Opportunity. To do what? To better or improve their lives or their situation. How's that come? Through righteousness, through knowledge of God. Where would we put this? Verse 18. Put this under 26, righteousness. And again, I put 27 for fulfilled life. So then we'll finish this section of scriptures up with 19. It says, the evil will bow before the good, and the wicked at the gates of the righteous. And when you look at this verse, are the righteous always in control? Are they always the leaders? No, they're not. But what are they always doing? They're always going to come up from behind and lead, aren't they? They're always going to win. The thing about Daniel, Daniel was taken, he was captured, taken hostage by a evil king. Who gained control? Daniel never became the king, but whose influence continued to change the way the king led and reigned? Daniel's. So the way that the evil are in power will bring their own destruction. But the righteous, will it bring about destruction? We look at the kings in Israel. You look at Saul. Saul, why did he lose the kingdom?
Didn't follow God's word.
He didn't follow God's word. So we go back and we see the evil will bow before the good, the wicked at the gates of the righteous. Okay? And at times we understand that may not be the case, but over time, what will wickedness always do? Drive itself out. Okay? And so anyway, put this, I put it 22, the nation, because we see that principle there. And also section 29, judgment. All right, we'll go to verses 20 and 21. It says, the poor man is hated even by his own neighbor, but the rich has many friends. He who despises his neighbor sins, but he who has mercy on the poor, happy is he. And so what we're looking at is oftentimes the poor are looked down upon, aren't they? Does richness and prosperity or the lack of things or poor have anything to do with righteousness? You see the poor lady with the 2 mites, how much did she have? Not much, but she was, her righteousness prevailed in that account as far as what we see. So poor man is hated even by his own neighbors. If you have money, what will you have?
Lots of friends.
Lots of
looking for
friends.
opportunity.
Yeah. And what are they looking for? Friendship?
No.
They're not looking for. So then we go and put this with 21, talking about despises his neighbor. And then the end of 21 is mercy on the poor. Who's God's creation? Who is God's creation? The rich or the poor? All of them, right? And so how should we look upon an individual? As a person, as a human being, as God's creation. When we go to James chapter 2 in verse 1, you have the congregation here that was having a struggle because James 2 and verse 1 says, "My brethren, do not hold the faith of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Lord of glory, with partiality." And so we go back and we look at what the Proverbs writer is writing about. He's writing about those who show partiality based upon what? Physical possessions. Okay? So you go back to James. "For if there should come into your assembly a man with a gold ring or fine apparel, and there should also come a poor man in filthy clothes," what are we looking at? Two economic classes of individuals, opposing economic classes. "And you pay attention to the one wearing the fine clothes, and say to him, 'Sit here in a good place,' and say to the poor man, 'You stand there,' or 'Sit here at my footstool.' Have you not shown partiality among yourselves and become judges with evil thoughts?" What was James accusing them of doing? Committing sin. Why? Because of their partiality towards those that don't have. And the account goes on where James tells them basically straighten up, don't act that way. So we come back and we look at what's being said here. It says, "A poor man," back to verse 20, "is hated even by his own neighbor, but the rich has many friends. He who despises his neighbor sins, but he who has mercy on the poor, happy is he." And so if we put this, we're talking about a joy or fulfilled life. Section 27 for your notes. Why? Because we need to treat people as God's creation, regardless of what they have. Verse 22, he said, "Do they not go astray who devise evil? But mercy and truth belong to those who devise good." We have any examples in the Bible of those that devised evil, invented evil? What is evil? Anything that goes against God's law. We see those prior to the flood, that they were those that their thoughts and imaginations were what? On evil continually. So then we look at the second part of this verse, and we see here those that devise good. Can we invent good?
So isn't it just the same thing, only one's planning evil and one's planning good?
That's what it is. It's the focus, right? Like you say, the planning. Here's what I thought in this. We can't invent good or evil, because that's already there. As far as sin is a transgression of God's law. There's lots of ways to do that. If we're looking for ways to invent, ways to transgress God's law, that's a problem. But as we think about inventing good or righteousness, can we do that? Here's what I thought about. I thought about ways that we try to fulfill righteousness. And the example that I had that I've thought about in connection with this is the Great Commission that's given in the New Testament is go into all the world and do what? Preach the gospel. Right? And that's a broad command. We're left expediency in fulfilling that. What's expediency? If we go into all the world and preach the gospel, do you go by foot? You go by car or camel or airplane? Right? You think about that. When we think about that, is the church evangelizing today differently than it did 50 years ago? Yeah. do we have Facebook ads 50 years ago? Campaigns like that? No. Okay. And so here what we're looking at is we're looking at the difference between those who are trying to find ways to do evil and those who are trying to fulfill righteousness. And the Great Commission was an example I thought of in connection with that. And so we go back, put it under 26 as far as righteousness, at least for the second half, or 2, the folly of fools. We'll go to 23. It says, in all labor there is profit, but idle chatter leads only to poverty. And so, in all labor there's a profit. There's a benefit to doing what? Staying busy and acting like you ought to. But idle chatter, what's some examples of idle chatter?
You're talking about
Talk about your plans, but there's no action.
No action behind it, right? Gossiping, backbiting, all that stuff. Just no good, right? So we see that. And it only leads to poverty, and so we got to be doers. Doers, the word, not lost the second half of my thought. Anyway, it's been a long day. I know you've had a long day too. 24, it says, the crown of the wise is their riches, but the foolishness of fools is folly. And so when you take this and connect it back to verse 23, in all labor there's what? A reward. There's a benefit. Okay, stay busy, keep doing. How many lives do we have to live? Got one, right? There was somebody mentioned fulfilling videos. I was like, what? They're fulfilling videos. They say there's videos, I guess, of them cutting things, and I don't know. They talk about, some of these processes with machines, where people just watch just endless hours of these, I guess they're interesting things, right? Somebody said, that heard the conversation, said, sounds like paint drying, right? Fulfilling videos, you watch it, watch grass grow, all that kind of stuff. But when we think about that, at the end of our life, you look back and say, boy, I watched 100,000 hours of fulfilling videos of paint drying and things squirting out of a tube and different things. You think about that. How many of us watch videos on the internet? We do, right? And sometimes we see videos that other people watch, and I say, I can't believe they would watch that. Then I think about some of the videos I've watched. And I'm not talking about anything inappropriate, just things that eat our time, right? There's no profit in that. So we go back and we think about what's being said here. It says the crown of the wise is their what? The riches. A busy person is going to increase and gain. A busy congregation is going to do what? Increase and gain. We see that principle. But the foolishness of fools is folly. And so they're just going to goof around and goof off. Section 2, you might put that under these verses. And we're out of time. Any questions or comments? All right. We'll leave it till next week and finish up. Get into chapter 15.